Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good Tuesday. And this is part two of my series on the five senses and how they relate to our worship and the sacraments. And today I'm going to be doing this sense of touch. And touching, there's not necessarily a lot of things that invoke a lot of images when we touch stuff in the church, but there are definitely two I want to talk about today. And the first one is the very first thing we touch when we walk into the church, and that's the water in the holy water font that we touch, and then we do a sign of a cross with us. Now, I want to tell a funny story the first time I ever did that. I remember I was a very little kid, and I was at St. Jude in Pearl. And I remember my mom telling me, you can put your hand in the water and, do what everybody else is doing with the water. Well, I'm thinking in my head as a little kid, you drink water because, that's what you do with water. So I stuck my hand in the water and then I licked my hand. And it tasted awful. I remember my mom screaming a little bit, and the woman behind her kind of started laughing because I did that too. And it was quite silly because as a young kid, I didn't know what to do with it. I thought you're supposed to drink water. And why is that? Drinking water gives us life. We drink water to give us life. We all have to drink water. The thing is, though, this is life-giving water, is representing life-giving water too, but not the kind that we drink. This reminds us of our baptism. So the first thing we do when we come to church is do something that reminds us of our baptism. So just as at our baptism, wherever we're a child or an adult when we're baptized in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And as we do that with the water, it reminds us of what happened at our own baptism, the covenant we entered into, how we become new creations in the image of Christ. So we become images of Christ in our lives. How we're brought into through the sacrament to be images of Him as priest, prophet, and king. Priests to offer sacrifices in our world, prophets to proclaim the gospel to the world, and kings to lead others to Christ as well. And all that happens when we touch the waters of the holy water font as we first walk into the church. It's meant to remind us of that baptism that happens there too. That's from the get-go when we walk into the church. So our church is telling us that when we first walk in and bless ourselves, is to remind us of our baptism. And it's also the last thing we do when we leave as well, so that when we go into the world, we're to live out that baptismal call. So that's what that touch of the water represents. And there's one other thing too I want to talk about with touch. So that's the holy water, one of the big things that we touch. And we know the feel of the water when we touch it too. The second thing though is that when we first get into the pew and when we leave our pew, we genuflect, don't we? Or those who can do. We genuflect, we go down on one knee, usually the right knee, and we do the sign of the cross as we face the tabernacle, because we always face the tabernacle when we do it, and then we enter into our pew. So the reason it's towards the tabernacle is because a genuflection is a symbol of worship. And we don't genuflect to people, we genuflect to Christ, who's God. So that's why we genuflect towards the tabernacle. It's why on Good Friday, when the tabernacle is empty, we don't genuflect when we enter into the church, because Christ is not there. And that feeling that we get when we go down that one knee, as our one foot hit the stone flooring, and it's kind of why I like we have stone flooring too, because it should be an act of humility before God. And it's a little more painful because it's hard floor too. And it's harder to get up too. But it's a symbol, it's a sign of us worshiping God, humbling ourselves before the Lord, and as an act of worship. Saying to the Lord, Lord, I'm lowering myself as worship towards you. And we know that feeling, because I was trying to think about things that we touch at Mass, and I would say when our knee hits the floor and we touch the floor, that feeling is the only time that we get that feeling on our knee throughout our entire week. I don't know of any other moment in my week that my knee hits the floor like it does when I first enter into a church, and I leave the church too. And that feeling in our knee is meant to show how we are lowering ourselves before Christ, before the Lord, in an act of worship to the Lord. So those are two ways that our church does, that touch invites us into the act of worship and invites us into the divine. So what are some of the other maybe things that you touch in the church that has that distinct feel to it that only you do here, that invites the divine into your life? And also, how are we living out these two that we have? How are we living out our baptism in our world today? Maybe that's something good to reflect on today. How are we living our baptism in our world today through that water that does actually save us?